First of all, allow me to apologize for not being able to accompany you in Vilnius today, as was my intention. But very urgent matters that require my personal attention, actually a crisis derived from corrupt businesses from previous administrations, required my presence in Guatemala these days. I congratulate Transparency International for celebrating this important event and express my warm wishes to all participants. And I especially appreciate the opportunity to address this conference virtually, as I want to share with you the story of Guatemala in 2023, the story of an extraordinary fit. Just a year ago, the Guatemalan political system was heading towards consolidating the dictatorship of corruption, with a co-opted electoral system, unprecedented illicit electoral financing and institutional capture. The country was drowning in despair, with a system that seemed unbreakable and where justice was a distant dream for ordinary citizens who seemed resigned to a life of uncertainty and fear under the scourge of corruption and its disastrous effects in security and development. I was not the first choice in the polls. Quite the contrary, polls put my running mate and myself at the bottom of the pile of an overcrowded presidential race. The elimination of inconvenient candidates in which the electoral authorities and the Guatemalan court system engaged was meant to rig the electoral process in favor of those willing to uphold the corrupt arrangement on which the system rests. Our movement made denunciation of corruption and its disastrous effects in democracy and development our rallying cry, inviting voters to opt out of a corrupt system and give us a mandate for democratic transformation and renewal. Most political pundits considered our efforts naive in the face of a well-oiled clientelistic electoral machinery that, election after election, succeeded in giving political power to contending expressions of a corrupt political class. But this political criminal establishment did not count on a citizenry who would no longer be deceived and that clearly identified corruption as the source of development deficits and institutional decay. These citizens defeated those who tried to manipulate their will against the odds. We became the instrument of the people to tell the corrupt establishment a resounding no. Guatemalans chose a dignified party with hardly any funding, and the candidate who at the start of the campaign was relatively unknown, but that elicited hope over the possibility of defeating the corrupt system. Guatemalans chose hope over despair. But electoral victory was only the first part of a unique transformational process. Following Semilla's election, the corrupt political class in Guatemala attempted a judicial coup. First, attempting to disqualify us from the second round, the runoff election, and then, having failed, unsuccessfully attempting to invalidate the results. But the indigenous people's leadership rose to defend the electoral process. Leaders from other sectors of society, from neighborhood associations to the private sector, joined their effort in what became a civil society movement for the rescue of democratic institutions, the democratic resistance, as it was called, which mobilized unified citizen action to defend electoral results from malicious interference. At the heart of these massive rallies and marches was the determination and courage of a community refusing to give up hope. Hope of a better future, of a democratic renewal, of inclusive development and the end of exclusion and marginalization. This is the mandate my government received at the ballots, and this is the legacy I intend to leave in Guatemala. But it is not that Guatemalans became aware of the dangers of corruption for the first time during this election. In fact, concern about the encroachment of political criminal networks in government institutions arose early in the century and led to the request of a previous Guatemalan government for international assistance in establishing a framework to support national institutions to fight criminal cooptation. The International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, CICIG by its acronym, was established in 2006 by an agreement between the Guatemalan government and the United Nations as an attempt to address corruption and impunity and was an important step in evidencing the modus operandi of these networks and the extent of their penetration in state institutions. Making corruption visible succeeded in mobilizing citizen support against corrupt actors. And in 2015, the world witnessed nationwide peaceful citizen protests that led to the fall of a corrupt government. But a strategy focusing mostly on judicial process, if successful at the onset, eventually became unable to manage the political tensions generated by its fundamentally judicial approach. A kleptocratic front called the Covenant of the Corrupt emerged as an authoritarian backlash uniting political and economic actors involved in different corruption schemes, gaining elected office through political parties that had been developing in the last decades as part of the cooptation mechanism. Gaining control of key judicial institutions enabled them to effectively shut down government-led anti-corruption efforts, expel international assistance, and launch a persecution of honest judges, prosecutors, lawyers, and journalists that has many of them still today living in exile. Corruption reigned again uncontrolled in the system, with judicial institutions operating to guarantee impunity and increasingly persecute whoever threatened the status quo. And for many, cooptation seemed indeed an irreversible reality. But this is the system that we have started dismantling in 2024, thanks to the unfettered hope of our people that a future without corruption is possible. It is an effort with many complications. Dismantling the institutional setup of corruption is more difficult when parts of the system are still in the hands of these criminal networks, as is the case with the Attorney General's office that continues attempting to undermine the elected government. Our government's mandate is to eradicate corruption in the executive branch we command. In every ministry and state secretariat, new transparency rules and mechanisms are being introduced every day, as well as in the working of our local level development councils. But we know that as a society, our challenge is to extend this fight on to the legislative and judicial branches. In this context, our country is currently carrying out the process to designate the members of our Supreme Court and appeals chambers. We are witnessing efforts by corrupt networks to re-entrench themselves in the judiciary. However, brave and honest officials and citizens are facing off against those corrupt networks, prompting us to hope that the recovery of our justice system has begun. We have invited a mission of the Organization of American States to observe the judiciary selection process. International observers were key allies to the Guatemalan people in preserving our democracy. They will be key allies in our people's efforts to protect judicial independence. We believe that even if gradual, the reforms we are introducing in the executive branch and those that are beginning to emerge in other branches of government will be effective in dismantling the infrastructure of cooptation developed over the years. But we are aware that they demand constant patience and unrelenting support from the people that bargain their future on our political project. A project that has the responsibility to look out for those that have been abused and exploited, and that needs to translate transparency into concrete results and public policy that deliver a better life for their citizens. Keeping the confidence of the people in our fight is a constant challenge for our government. We also understand that if we want to succeed in reducing this self-reinforcing corruption cycle sustainably, we must use a different approach to the ones already known and tried. It will certainly be difficult, as even today, corrupt forces conspire to regain power that they feel was taken from them. We are not copy-pasting models, nor we are reinventing the wheel. We know there are lessons to be learned from other people's experience in the fight against corruption, and we are here ready today to learn from all of you. But we also understand that it is us, the ones that need to build our own path, and we will gladly share our experience with every country in the planet ready to engage in this fight for decency. Guatemala's fight against corruption is far from over. But over the course of the last few years, we have learned important lessons, and I would like to share some of them with you. First and foremost, citizens must be placed at the center of any anti-corruption project. They are the real heroes of the pro-democratic and anti-kleptocratic efforts. The driving force behind any such project is the mission to tilt the balance of power in favor of citizens, to stop the cycle where the corrupt few can exploit and abuse the many, to give back what was stolen, to make sure that every public official uses their power impartially. This is not just a political battle. It is a commitment to a social vision of life with dignity, one that provides to those who work every day the possibility to build a better future for themselves, their children, and their country, and a clear sense of purpose. We also understand that in a context where corruption is ubiquitous and rampant, attempting to jail every and each infractor may be futile and politically complicated. We know that a key part of the fight against rampant corruption is effective denunciation of key cases that are particularly offensive to society, to bring culprits to court. And we are doing our effort in this, denouncing multi-million dealings in health, education, and infrastructure, or denouncing the spurious attacks against electoral results. But we also know that a different approach is required to provide an exit ramp for the many who participated in the system because they felt cornered, or simply because corruption was normalized as part of reality. We believe that most of them will gladly disengage from corrupt practices if provided with an effective normative framework and alternative incentives. And their disengagement is critical to effectively underpin anti-corruption efforts. In general, we understand the challenge as one of transforming social and political practices to root out corruption and consolidate rule of law through a strategy combining judicial, social, educational, and political approaches. Other key features of this approach would be a focus on the truth. We need to uncover the full extent of corruption and how it impacts individuals and communities. This involves comprehensive investigations and public hearings where victims can share their stories and be acknowledged as such. By doing so, we honor the suffering and ensure that the truth is not buried. Making evident the harm corruption causes to the life of every citizen is critical to mobilize political agency against it. The recovery of stolen assets. We must identify and retrieve assets stolen or acquired through corrupt practices. This requires us to strengthen our legal frameworks for asset recovery and enhancing international cooperation to trace and reclaim assets obtained through corrupt practices. These resources should then be redirected towards development projects that benefit the citizens, our heroes in this story. We need a vision beyond incarceration. We try desperately to fight power head-on, but power often fights back with twice the strength and without playing fair. Carceral approaches punish the corrupt and are necessary, but do not pay back the people with a new fresh page. While it is essential to hold corrupt individuals accountable, we must also explore alternatives to imprisonment that can be more effective in promoting rehabilitation and reconciliation. We need delivering development dividends. The fight against corruption must not hinder the functioning of the state. We need to pursue justice while ensuring that government services continue to be delivered efficiently, as people will measure the effectiveness against corruption in the improvement in public services they see around them every day. We must not be hesitant to govern effectively, to actively change people's lives. A state like ours has abandoned its most vulnerable population for a long time now. And it is time to use these institutions as the instrument to deliver what the people need and deserve. Throughout this approach, it is important to keep in mind that these key features should build towards guarantees of non-recurrence. They may all require institutional reform, which in turn necessitates political commitment and maturity to try, revise our work, and try again. Electing an anti-corruption government in another ways corrupt context is in a way betting against the odds. It requires determination, commitment, and creativity to overcome the many challenges co-opted institutions will continue to present to reformers. Our government is carrying on in this effort, conscious of the mandate given to us by the people and ready to make it true. We know that it is only upon their support and confidence that such ambitious results can be achieved. We are here to serve their will. Thank you.
Y bien, hasta acá el video de hoy. Recuerden que ustedes tienen la última opinión que pueden dejar acá abajo en la cajita de comentarios. Dicho esto, nos vemos hasta el siguiente video. Adiós.